Okay, so this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about online text, and I'm going to use the word text in a really broad way. So a text is something you read. A text can be a video. A text can be an audio. So we're going to talk about text, anything that's got a verbal component that you got to make meaning from, okay? And we're going to use different kinds of texts. So we're going to talk about picking them. We're going to talk about picking an approach. And maybe talk about what is often the default approach and some other options. We're going to nail home 3 steps in working with the text. So if you want to take away one thing, put a little star by that. That's the big take home. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about issues involved with giving up control in the classroom while you keep enough. Okay, so that's kind of the agenda for the day. Thinking about text, and again, text in that big, broad sense. When you're working with online text, you're in a slightly different world than when you're working with a textbook, because the textbook editor did all this for you. But when you're in this world, where, for instance, in this online curriculum, you have more than you could ever use. So you have to go through picking things that are appropriate for your setting, for your students, and so on. So these are the kind of the big 4 to think about. The first is simply the level of sophistication of the ideas. There are things that 6th graders probably just can't wrap their brains around yet. Would be perfectly appropriate for 10th or 11th graders. So just the level of the ideas, regardless of how hard the words are, or regardless of how pretty the look is. When I remember the first time I really learned this idea. I was in graduate school, and some poor professor, God bless him, was in charge of dragging me through Aristotle's Poetics. Now, I don't think there are any 2-syllable words in Aristotle. Simple language, but the ideas are really complicated. And, I had my first thing about, it's not all about hard words. But sometimes it is about hard words. So you want to look at the level of the vocabulary. Again, if it's just 1 or 2 key words that are kind of churchy words and you want kids to learn, well, that's fine. But if the underlying background vocabulary is pretty challenging, you want to think of that as at the upper end of the spectrum rather than the lower end, the younger kids. Navigation. We took care of the navigation in the online curriculum. So it's the same pattern every unit. Once you learn it, it's pretty easy to navigate. But we have lots of external links for you to use or to think about using. And so that's another issue to think about. You don't want to be spending your precious class time worrying about who clicks what, when, and where, So if it's hard to get around, it's probably not something that either you want to use or maybe not use in a way where they are responsible for the navigating. Sometimes you can be the navigator. And then finally, the format. Do you want an audio? Do you want a video? Do you want text? There's some of all of that in there. And some of those decisions have to do with what you're trying to accomplish. Some of them, frankly, have to do with the facilities you've got. If you don't have access to Wi-Fi, you're probably going to use more of the print resources. If you do have, we'll talk about all kinds of ways to skin the online cat, though. Okay, now it's your turn.
Now
right,
it's
Liz?
my turn, yes it is. How many in here are catechists? Everybody's hand should go up, because you are a catechist.
Oh, that's a
Catechist
trick
101.
question, Liz.
Everybody
No.
is a catechist. Everybody's a catechist, that's right. So, this is probably a lot of the example that's used in faith formation classes, where somebody will stand in front and then begin to lecture, kind of classroom setting. When I was in a classroom working with middle school and high school kids on a Sunday morning, I could see them dreading sitting there in a desk, that it wasn't their room, they couldn't touch anything, how horrible it was. So my idea was, they don't want to be there because of the setting, so let's make it more, comfortable. Let's make it where they can share and that. And that was always my idea, pushing. Finally, somebody heard, or there were other like-minded people like me with that same idea. So then that's when we get into the small groups, because that's where teens and middle schoolers really can interact better. And I know with the field testing, that was one of the inputs, was they loved being able to talk among each other about what was going on. So if you think about it, they don't get to do that too much in a classroom Monday through Friday. But on a weekend, and we really want to show them that this is exciting stuff, this is a new adventure, what better way than in small groups? Individual setting, I was talking to Susan about this. I said, this would be a great way if you're going to be training your catechist. You could do something where if you have that day of training for your catechist, do something like that. Have them sit in groups, do what the kids would do. Even if you did a day retreat, like maybe for adults, for the parents, this curriculum could be used in that, because it's so versatile and there's so much great information. And when Susan was talking about the vocabulary, one example came to me, and I don't mean any disrespect for the Vatican documents, but they are very hard to read as an adult. But there's a lot of excitement in there when you really get down and you break it down and you start really putting yourself in that position, them writing them, the thought process. It's exciting. But if I had a hard time and I had to read these documents, can you imagine a teenager or a middle schooler who really their reading is probably just as need basis, not really adventuring on to other levels. So, so like the Vatican documents, you may want to read it and take a little part and then explain, because, teenagers and middle schoolers, it's all about vision. They need to be wowed. And unfortunately, like I had said, the Vatican website is not the most wowing website, but if you explain to them, let me break it down for you and tell you what's there, it makes it really exciting. So one of the big questions in this curriculum was, and it's very basic, real simple, what do sisters do? That's a real simple question.
Could you put your 14-year-old hat on for a minute, okay? And you're all a very sophisticated audience, but put your 14-year-old hat on and tell the people at your table what you think of when somebody says, "Oh, yeah, that's a sister." So take a minute, think about what you might say, or what you might have heard kids say, or just pretend to be a 14-year-old and tap into popular culture. And then we'll compare what you guys say to what the students we field tested said.
No, it's in the back of my head. I've been asked you to tell me a little bit about your story of coming to the CCBI
Yes.
Sisters.
Right. I'm from El Paso, and I went to school with the Incarnate Word Sisters, and then I went to high school to another Catholic high school. This is in 1966, so in those days we thought, will I be married or will I be single or will I?
So let's take a moment to write in your little book there what surprises you, and then share among your group what you wrote down while we reconnect.
In the group I field tested with, they were surprised at all those degrees. And she was very dismissive of them, but they said, she's got all those degrees, and they were a little surprised there. Yeah.
Okay. So that was using a video. So now we were given the question, what if you don't have internet access? So that took Susan and I to a different level. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do when you don't have internet? So maybe you have internet at home, and this is when we're going to come to this document. We pulled out a piece.
So this is also in the curriculum. It's in the little list of what do sisters do. I picked it because I liked it. And if I hadn't had to prep it in advance, I would have let you pick. But we needed to prep it in advance. So we're going to ask you to do two things again. So you have to share. So either all heads on in or somebody read aloud to the group. You sort it out. You're all smart people. But as you do this, I want you to think about two things that this sister does. So, that what do sisters do, that's a really kind of a big question, and one of the things we're going to try to do is unpack that word do. So at least two things that sister does. Okay, so read it to yourself, find your two favorite things.
And once you finish reading, you'll go back to your little book and write down the two things that you notice. And then then talk them on your small group.
English teacher and me might want to go up to the board and just do a little, make a great big T, we call it T chart. And on one side we might do active, and the other we might do thinking. And we might put things like the gardening and the weeding and the sharing. And then on that other side, we might put the things that struck all of us, those things that were about the reflection, the thinking, the making meaning. Which again is a nice way to kind of unpack that idea of what sisters do. And it's a little bit more than what our culture says in terms of do. Okay, so we're going to talk about the teaching strategies we've used. Let's see, were you first up?
You were doing that one.
I'm doing that, okay. Okay, first of all, their phones could be your friends or not. So we chose to do this the most minimally tech way we could. You may have seen Liz and I yesterday cutting and pasting and creating this handout sitting over in the cafeteria. But I've also used this when we did some field testing in a very, very ordinary classroom, no computers, no anything. We had kids in small groups with their phones. A lot to think about when you decide whether or not you're going to have kids take out their phones in class. First of all, there are the financials. So if you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't want to be asking, people to run up their data and all of that. Some neighborhoods, that won't be an issue. Others, it will be. You need to make, smart and realistic judgments there. But the world is kind of moving to a bring your own device world. And so we did try it out in a bring your own device world, and we found students did just fine sharing the text on a phone, on a laptop, on a little iPad, whatever they had. Usually, I walked into a classroom that wasn't expecting to see me, and I said, so what do you got electronically? Everybody brought something out, and so we had them in little small groups. So that's kind of one thing to kind of think about. The other is if they're going to be on your phones, you've got to be all over the room. And you might have a parent or two with you. And I think you might have more luck getting parents in there if they don't have to teach, they don't have to do anything, just but be a friendly presence in the room walking around. Okay, let's hit the big three. Whenever you work with a text, audio, video, just words on the page, we do three things. We set it up in some way. We elicit kids' questions. So in the first one, what's your image of sisters? And when I was working with a group of our high school kids, it was a bunch of Nacho Libre nuns. Or Sister Strict, those were the two big images. So that's one way. Another way is to plant an idea that you're later going to harvest, like talking about making Sunday special. But in some way, do something to set it up. You can't just sort of click and go. The second is give the students a very specific task to do while they're reading or viewing or listening. So notice you had a what surprised you, what two things did she do. Those kinds of things help focus attention so that kids are going to be all kinds of levels of attention to the task, ability to do the task. So given that focus means you're going to more typically get something useful from them. You know, most of them can answer a couple questions. They may not get everything about it, but they'll get one or two central things. Finally, at the end, process together. So if you think about it, it's just before, during, and after. Do something before to set it up, to help make it successful. Help focus them on some kind of active reading or viewing or listening. And then talk about what you got. Okay,
Definitely.
Liz, crowd control for
Okay,
you. You
crowd
work with the
control,
teenagers.
yeah.
You really need to
So
know that.
that sounds like great ideas, definitely. And in adults, it's good. We don't need any supervision. We all are good. But with kids, you know, it's very tempting for them to get into the Instagram or tweet or whatever. So this is a great opportunity to call in some parents. You should know the kids in the classroom and know which parents are pretty much involved that would come in. And this is a great way to teach parents also. So then, just like at this table, you would try to have a parent sitting at a table, or maybe a young adult, somebody who's not afraid to speak up and say, hey, let's really, you know, go through this. Let's talk about it, who could really help steer. And hopefully that would help develop leaders in the classroom as well, because the next time you do this, maybe you can see somebody who you can really, you know, designate that task to. It's great to help. You know, what you want to do is empower, empower, empower. You want to empower the people in your parish, and this is a great way of doing that, getting the parents involved.
And can I add one more little piece there?
Sure.
So a lot of the parents who work in faith formation don't have backgrounds as teachers. There's like just one little lesson from classroom management that you could share with them that would make their lives better, which is that if you stand next to someone, they will behave. You know, so you just move around the room. And typically you don't need to say anything at all. You were behaving perfectly, but you know, I needed a victim. So just that idea of, you know, noticing where there's starting to be a little bit of making your own fun in the corner, and you just don't make an issue of it, you just stroll that way. That one lesson. First of all, it's a very pleasant way to do it, and second, it's really effective. Okay, Liz, our last slide. These people will be so glad. Okay, less is more. You know, I think, you know, when we work, particularly, I think the people are doing like the catechist working on Sunday afternoon. I'm thinking of my days as doing that in a classroom where somebody said, yeah, you can use the room, but don't touch anything. And somebody handed me a book and said, we don't like it, but here's what we've got. You know, so, you know, we're not used to thinking of working in a luxurious setting. But I think in the most important way, we do work in a luxurious setting, in that we've got the luxury of time. Unlike, you know, I train students to become public school teachers. And, you know, they got to learn to cover 12 competencies by the end of the week. We don't have to do that. You know, we have the luxury of focusing on personally making connections. It's not about the content. It's about the connections. Enough of the content will stick. Enough will stick. The connections are what will really follow them. And so we would say, don't be afraid of using little pieces. This is a wonderful reading. It broke my heart to only use 3 paragraphs, but it seemed like that would be enough to do this job. Okay, questions, comments?